Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you to another page of the Lime Green Journal. A brief information about this venture. Lime Green Visual Art Space is excited to present a series of talks as the Lime Green Journal that tells stories of creative journeys, cultural and conceptual exchange, and artistic cross fertilization, where we converse and explore the fascinating minds of creative people. We hope to inspire curiosity, ignite your imagination, and provoke new ways of thinking about the world. For this feature, our guest is Zain Naqvi. As a designer and entrepreneur, Zain's work is an amalgamation of post-memory pop culture and investigational storytelling for a digital-first world. Since entering the Web3 space in last 2020, Zain Naqvi has worked on Ape Harbour, founded in 2021. It is the world's first metaverse shipyard, boasting an international community for ambitious Web3 pioneers. With the mission to build the finest yachts of the metaverse, he also serves as the co-founder of Alter, a hyper-focused curation platform that connects creators and brands from emerging economies with collectors and fans around the world through the power of digital collectables. A graduate of the National College of Arts, Lahore, his work has previously appeared on Forbes, Fast Company, Design Taxi, Pulptastic, and is part of the Imago Mundi Project for the Venice Biennale. Recently, he curated an exhibition titled Hum, a metaverse art experience that brought works from some of the world's most innovative and boundary pushing artists to Pakistan. Sparrow at Heart, a graphic novel by Naqvi, was published in 2016 in collaboration with Rohtas 2 and Lahore Literary Festival. The book is now part of the Asian and Middle Eastern Literature Archives at UCLA and was featured a focal point at Sharjah Art 2018. Zaid, thank you for your precious time. I hope for a wholesome conversation.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Let's start with the first question. How do you decide that your idea is good enough to be translated into a visual of any kind, any form?
I have like a practice which is essentially divided in two halves. One is where I'm just making works that are not going to be featured in, like as in for an exhibition, or it's not a long-term project. That's mostly what my visual diary is. I'll just post them on Instagram or share them, tweet them, and that's it. There is no life to that idea apart from that. So my filter there is not very strong. The other thing is works that are developed with, the pace at I work in, mostly like for 3 months, for 6 months, at times a couple of years. So those I have very hard caps for myself. Are they fitting into the discourse that is generally happening? And it's usually international discourse. I don't like my work to talk about local politics. Although with the recent wave or resurgence of violence in Pakistan, that thing is seeping in, and I am having a very hard time, navigating that, because for a very long time, I've been, not been very comfortable with the idea that when there is violence around, that your work needs to be violent.
Yes.
So it's not violent, but somehow or the other, the sort of PTSD from 2015, 2016, and all these bombings happening again is coming back. So right now, my challenge is how to, keep my visuals as appealing as possible while also balancing all the chaos around, I guess.
So when the ideas are accumulating, and that, like you said, you put it out to the universe, and your mode of putting out is on social media. You put snippets, fragments of your ideas. Don't you fear plagiarism? Don't you fear that till the point where your idea is completely solidified or executed in its final form, someone else must have taken it, or someone else must have made it their own? So how do you deal with that?
Oddly enough, that is something that I'm not very, I don't have a huge ego, so to speak, there. If you want to take my ideas and do something with it, great. By all means, do it. Because if there was somebody who's going to do it better than me, they would have done it by now. They wouldn't be waiting for me to, produce a prototype and then do it. Yes, it has happened that, specifically in the Web3 space, that we've discussed ideas and people have, taken them and like made money out of that, and fine, good for you. But the thing is, later on, you couldn't achieve anything. Like, you made something based on one idea that, I gave you, and now you're just a sitting duck. You couldn't produce your second thing. So for me, anytime I've had like a creative issue with anybody else as well, to judge myself, I often look at, will they be able to produce something when I'm not there or not? And by the grace of God, up till now, that has not really happened. Plagiarism, and I don't think you can really do anything about them, especially in a place like Pakistan, where laws and copyright laws and everything is not that strong. I mean, we've been trying to work on that as well. But I don't really have an issue with that. Agar aapne karna, you can. I mean, I'm even open with my any prompt that I'm using on Midjourney or one of these AIs. People are very protective of that because I mean, at the end of the day, work is going to lead to more work. The amount of ideas that I give out to people for free is way too much. Maybe I shouldn't,
Should be
but
charging for them.
I should definitely be charging for them. Definitely.
How did you realize that your contributions in the digital art world would be beneficial for yourself, for your journey, specifically the creative journey?
That's an interesting, but also like a very multi-layered question. I mean, I think the issue in a space like South Asia is, I wouldn't just say Pakistan, is that creatives don't understand what their importance is. One, that's the, I think, essential problem with creatives here. And secondly, they don't understand how the system works. Ya to we are revolutionaries who go and sit in a corner and say that, our art will forge a new nation, which is almost impossible in today's time, unless and until you're talking about a digital nation, that's a whole different concept then. Second side is that we do not understand that there are realities such as global recessions, such as pandemics, such as, general topics of discussion that are relevant or aren't relevant. So for me, my digital practice needs to stay relevant because without that, it's not going to make, a huge sense for people around. So there are things that, there are things in my practice because I borrow heavily from science fiction that at times do not make any sense. But then give it 3 months, give it 6 months, give it a year, something similar starts popping in the real world.
Yes.
And that's when your work starts becoming, relevant. So recently, one thing that has been happening to me a lot is that a lot of youngsters, a lot of peers that I meet, they're like, that you don't understand this. And I'm like, listen, I've been in the same boat as you guys for a decade. For an entire decade, I was the fly on the wall in every exhibition, in every startup, everywhere I was working. So when all of a sudden my work has become relevant, it has become relevant because the world has caught up to it.
Yes.
I was always there. So it's just, and I'm not saying this in a, like in my hubris. I'm saying this in all humility, that because I've struggled, working on things that maybe weren't relevant here. So yeah, at least that's what my practice is.
Maybe you were ahead of time or the flux that was about to happen in the society you were living in? Or maybe were you underestimating your skills, your creative ideas?
I think a lot of my brought up has been in subcultures, gaming, comic books, pop culture, and those are things that weren't relevant. So, I mean, I remember like in school, I used to be like, a crazy comic buff who jiske paas ek do comics hamesha hoti thi. And, me and a couple of other friends, we used to geek about, Iron Man and so on. And we were the uncool people, nobody cared who Iron Man was. But now you're walking on the street, ask who Iron Man is, and everybody even in Pakistan is a huge fan now. So it's just about the relevance that has, been, I think, achieved, so to speak.
Which is sort of directly relative to the awareness that perhaps the media gives to the audience, to all kinds of viewership. That's also another aspect of.
Yeah.
That's another aspect of, sharing the creative ideas or the visual vocabulary, so to say.
I think with us millennials, we were the, generation that got caught in the middle,
Yes.
Gen Zs are very cool. They're absolutely fantastic people.
Mm-hmm.
They might be living physically in this world, but they have a global understanding of what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
With millennials, we were caught up. We were influenced by the world around,
Yeah.
but we weren't really sure how we're going to take things forward.
Mm-hmm.
We still, had like a lot of baggage from, our previous generations. And we still carry that in our art, in our design. So, talk to any millennial or anybody from before in the previous generations, which is something that I had to take out of myself as well. So right
Mm-hmm.
now, for instance, AI art is a huge debate. 20 years ago, digital art was a huge debate.
Yes.
People did not consider works made on Photoshop or Unreal or whatever early softwares there were for 3D to be art. But now
Mm-hmm.
we've gotten the acceptance of that in the gallery circuits, in
Mm-hmm.
general areas, in biennales and art exhibitions and all. And now the issue is AI art. And the problem is that the powers that be, they're accepting AI art. So one of
Mm-hmm.
the biggest sellers, at India Art Fair were coming from, the AI art side. And everywhere you're seeing AI artists pop up. So how long do you think, you'll be able to hold these gates, so to speak?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, for me, gatekeeping is not something to be okay with. If somebody is doing something, look at what they're doing, learn from them. They're doing something right. So rather than being the pitchfork crew running behind Dracula, maybe learn from Dracula. What is he doing? How is he luring people in?
Yeah.
So to speak. So yeah.
So you talked about all the concerns or the unresolved baggage that we have from our previous generations or the teachings, be it academic or influential, from your surroundings, all the ideas and the observations that you have. How do you describe the core concern of your creative work? Or does it vary from one genre to another?
No, no. So, I mean, the reason I mention post memory again and again is that is essentially core of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Post memory is that, for somebody who doesn't know, is this concept that you have memories of things that you've never experienced. And as humans, specifically as South Asians, that baggage is post memory technically. आप कहाँ से आते हो, आपकी ethnicity क्या है,
Mm-hmm.
where your parents were born. So you could be born in Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad, but if your family is coming from, let's say, Lucknow in India or Patiala in India, or if they migrated from, Afghanistan, there is a link there. Well, I mean, realistically, it doesn't matter to you.
And you haven't
Realistically,
you,
you
you
never
haven't
met them.
lived those memories.
You haven't lived
You
those
don't
memories.
even
You
you
haven't
don't even
experienced
know
those.
you don't even know if they're true.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Because, but they're still part of you. There is
Mm.
no way that you can, take them away. And secondly, is the pop culture element, that because I was, somebody who was raised in Pakistan, yes, a little bit here and there as well, but uh, generally, there was a lot of Americana coming in. So in the 90s, we were raised on pop culture. We were raised on Saturday morning cartoons. We were raised on, cornflakes or cereals, which a generation prior to wasn't raised on.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, you have people here who are much more, I think, Americanized in their Pakistaniyat, if I may say that.
Yes.
You don't dress like traditional Pakistanis. So
Mm.
my work is that, it's post memory pop culture, because that's essentially who I am. I'm a product of when, let's say, my grandparents talk about it, they talk about, their migration stories and everything, and they're part of me.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that is experience, how much of that is something they heard somewhere, how much of that is, their trauma? I don't know, because, for an entire generation in Pakistan, I don't think there are a lot of people even left from the partition generation, which is very scary on both sides of the borders. uh, I don't think they ever got, the help that they needed, because they went through a huge thing in their lives. I mean, just imagine today sitting that, what if, God forbid, Pindi and Islamabad belong to two different countries in the future? Just the thought of that is unacceptable, because you don't
Mm-hmm.
see the divide happening. Imagine what if they're, cut off from in the middle,
Yes.
one part here, one part there. It's just
Mm.
something that your brain does not accept. And for an entire generation, that was their reality. They left their homes and they trickled down this information to their kids and to their kids' kids. So, at least when it came to me, these were stories that I grew up with. And on one side, I was growing up with, these things of partition and the war and, the early struggle. And on the other side, I was growing up on, comics and pop culture. So those things kind of fused at a certain point where, the visuals that I create are very colorful. They're very fun, but we're looking for a home and they're never going to get that because they've left one home, they don't settle in the other, and they're absolutely, people who are not there. And I mean, there are influences there from other places as well. For example, a lot of Japanese manga was doing this, not in these terms, but a lot of, for example, Godzilla is, I think, one of the greatest creations in pop culture ever. Japan gets bombed, and because they have a spirit for everything, they have a creature for every, it's part of their religion, it's part of Shinto, that, a tree has a spirit, a mountain has a spirit. They literally gave, the atom bomb a spirit. They created Godzilla. Yes, he's a monster, he's a force of nature. He can walk and destroy cities, but he's also the savior at times. He's also this creature who is way too grand.
Yes.
So, and at least, when I was looking at Japanese pop culture, I loved how they had, taken their history and presented it as pop culture. And so now, if you want to enjoy it with popcorn, yes, you can. But if you want to cut down, at a deeper level, yes, there is so much to be learned.
Would you call that a positive manipulation by the Japanese culture? That it took something which is so dark and they added something super creative to it?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, imagine like, Hollywood making movies, remaking them for something that they themselves created. Like that's absolutely crazy to think of. I mean, and I think even now those things are starting to happen in Bollywood as well.
Yes.
If you look there, a lot of sci-fi concepts are coming in, a lot of speculative fiction concepts are coming in. There is one thing that I'm very, sure about. I think if you want to improve your next generation, make them read all sci-fi authors at 3 or 4 years of age. You need, put them through that. The Chinese
Yes.
are doing the same thing because soft culture is culture. We need to understand that. We are super proud of, Pasuri and everything, but we need to realize that we don't have a infrastructure that is helping artists or designers or cultural producers. All these guys who are working, whether they're artists, they're singers, they're, whatever, they're working on their own, selves, on their own funds. So, but if you can imagine a time where, the powers that be are a little serious about Pakistani culture and Pakistani pop culture, it can be huge. I'm pretty sure it can be huge.
So, how do you live and function in an atmosphere of constant flux with your creative process? Do you ever
Ah,
have this fear of missing out on all the trends or whatever is happening in the world outside? Or do you feel like there is certain areas where you still belong? And then you have that anchor, you have that compass needle pointing, okay, this is what I have to try now. So, but how do you keep up with it? How do you keep up with the constant change and constant information?
well, one, as I like to say it, I'm a child of the internet. I grew up on, Yahoo, and before Yahoo, a lot of other
Orchid.
things, and message boards and Orkut. And I mean, even before, yeah, I'm like I mean, now I do ask my parents this, that I was way too young to be on MIRC on my own. That was not cool, Today, if a kid is sitting talking to strangers on the internet, it would, I mean, I wouldn't be okay with it. But back then, that's how I was raised, at least, had like a PC at a very, very young age. Before that, in school, we used to, meddle with a bit of coding, making some little things here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think that flux is very part of me. So I've over time, I've sort of accepted that chaos. I can start 4 works at the same time. I am on any given day, usually I'm reading 3 books at the same time because I felt that, beyond a certain point, I couldn't keep my attention to one thing. Yeah, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of, I don't want to go into my therapy details, but the thing is, like, that's essentially how what the internet has done to all of us. We are in an ADHD like state, all of us, constantly, because our messages are there. Something is popping up here, something is popping up there. So just yesterday, I was talking to a friend, and he was messaging me on Instagram as well as WhatsApp. So I told this buddy of mine, I'm like, यार एक जगह message कर ले. And then he went all out. He emailed me. He was writing one sentence on email, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, everywhere. And he was like, hello, 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 hello. That's what our reality is. We don't need all these tools. We really don't. But we've made those tools and now we're stuck in them. So even, for instance, when I'm making a lot of my projection-based art, which you have a certain experience as we've worked on a couple of things together, there's always this, thing that I get where people want me to speed it up. People want it to be very fast. I make it move at a very slow pace, at a snail's pace. Because the moment somebody is looking at my work, I want them to stop, just let go of whatever is there in their head, and just sit and relax and just view at one single thing. A lot of people I know, generally from outside the art world, don't understand abstract art or abstract expressionism for a very long time. But now the same people are appreciating abstract art because there's so much visuals everywhere that at a certain point you just need to sit and look at maybe a blur, or maybe like something that doesn't represent anything.
So tell us about the nature of your creative process. Is it super solitary or is it collaborative? Is it something super out loud? And this is minus the social media snippets, not those. What is your work like? What is your process like when you are by yourself and there's no internet?
No, I think even without the internet, I have like a good chunk of reading material always there. In fact, one thing that is there is I tend to stay away from the internet. I mean, one thing that I've heard again and again people telling me is that you're not present in a lot of areas. So for example, I think a couple of weeks back I checked my Facebook after like 2 years, and there were like God knows what was happening there, and I had totally forgot that I had a Facebook as well. I usually exist on Instagram. I like that because it's visual, I guess. Twitter is there because Web3 exists on Twitter. So and Discord for the better part, and those places, but they can sort of induce a lot of anxiety in you, because you're talking to these faceless people day in day out, and there is a point where you need to stop. You can even so for me, when I'm in my work mode, I want to be as far away as from social media as possible. I do not want anything coming in there because although it's an outlet, I think for a lot of maybe younger folks, it's how they run. It's where their entire thing develops. It's where their entire understanding of work develops. But for me, that's sort of important.
So this takes me to another question, which is how do you construct an environment for yourself where you perform the best?
Oh, I again going back to the chaos wali cheese. So during before the pandemic, I had huge issues. I wanted, everything to be at the perfect temperature. The room needs to be a certain way. It needs to be, I still want, I mean, I still require a studio to be clean. I cannot work in a chaotic space. No matter how much chaos I have inside of me, everything needs to be like in its place. But personally, I think I've sort of given up the notion of a physical space anymore. I don't do that because one, I mean, traveling a lot between Lahore and Islamabad usually. So, and secondly, a lot of the work in my space is digital. So it doesn't really require, me lifting huge canvases, or it's just me, my laptop, maybe my sketch pad or my diary, and that's that. So I'm like the sort who can sit anywhere and work right now. And I mean, I it's difficult to explain because that's something that's changed, I guess. It's one of the good things, the better things I think the chaos offered to me. Because
Mm-hmm.
before that, I was very specific. कि अच्छा ये नहीं हुआ मैं काम नहीं कर सकूंगा, ये नहीं हुआ मैं काम नहीं कर सकूंगा. But during the pandemic, a couple of works that I did were they were done in a horrendous fashion. So like one of the biggest projects that I did, which was Ape Harbour, because it was peak pandemic and I I had ordered a working desk for myself, मगर वो आ नहीं सका time, old abandoned dressing table.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, yeah, if this project can be done on a dressing table, as long as I have my tools with me and my ideas with me, I can pretty much work from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of let go of that entire idea that everything needs to be, perfect. I mean, maybe if it is, it's going to be better, but I don't think of it as a handicap anymore.
Okay. So you're saying you're not a high maintenance artist. You can adjust anywhere, anytime.
Sadly, yes. Sadly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I shouldn't, but yeah.
So how do you archive your notes, your ideas? What do you do? Do you write them down? Do you record yourself? Do you take screenshots? What is your process?
Uh, Something that one, I would say, app that I've heavily depended on for the last, I think, 5 or 6 years, ever since I've been working professionally, even in agencies and all these places,
Mm-hmm.
is Evernote. So it lets you record, it lets you write down, it lets you scribble. And recordings usually tend to work better because a lot of my ideas come to me when I'm driving. So, I mean, I tend to have a sort of an you know ideas dropping down on me usually when I'm on the highways or motorways, because I don't know, for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
that's when I think my brain is wired that way. So I just take out the phone because I don't want to put my life or other people's life in danger as well using the phone. So I just click on the Evernote record and it keeps the note there. And because one thing that is good with this specific app is that I personally I have like this timeline sort of a habit where I just
Mm-hmm.
put all the ideas that I have on the timeline. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
an idea that came years ago, uh, I don't think it's relevant anymore or its time is right now. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'll just work on it and I'll schedule it in a way that it is released when it is better for it to be released. Because one thing I think I wasn't taught in any of the art schools that I went to
Mm-hmm.
was that timing is super important. You
Yes.
can be an absolutely, marvel of an artist, but if you don't know how to present yourself at the right time in the right space, it's not
Mm-hmm.
going to have the same impact. Absolutely. It's very hard. Your relevance doesn't come from that. And that's why a lot of times with younger artists or even with peers who are just creating and throwing around works, I
Mm-hmm.
tend to get into long debates that why are you guys doing this, I often say this, like stop like trying to sell, rock to people who listen Qawwali and Qawwali to people who listen rock,
Yes.
unless and until they're like into hybrid, stuff and fusion. But I mean, you need to look at your work in that manner, if you producing a work itself is not alone, it's not, all. You need to understand where that work will go, what kind
Mm-hmm.
of a literature will go with it. Is that work catering to an audience outside of the art and design world? Is it
Mm-hmm.
catering to techies? Is it catering to, I don't know, theater people? Is it catering to cinema?
Yes.
And take things forward. So at least that's how I tend to work.
That you talked about the timing and knowing your audience. That's something that someone who's very close to me has said to me when I do anything
Yeah.
creative. They always He always says, uh, whatever you do, you need to know who your audience is. You need to know who you're working for. Is this because whatever we do, the creative process, I strongly believe it's an act of service. You're doing something, it holds a responsibility, whether it's giving a visual pleasure, whether it's giving some educational notes out, or whether it's to give out a message. I think knowing the audience is supremely important. And for that, like you said, the timing has to be, you need to master in your timing system. So, in your opinion and experience, what has been the best timing or the standout moment or the standout timing for your creativity or any project or any idea to surface?
I think what there's a, and this goes back to like, the age that we live in of social media and this constant FOMO, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think FOMO works in two ways. It's not about, being at a certain place, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also about, showcasing who you are 24/7. So I often exist on the opposite end of the spectrum because at times I'm super comfortable not putting up anything. So if I am having a really good day, I don't think I'll be posting on social media, but that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but when it comes to people, specifically creatives, because all of us at a certain, angle, we need appreciation. We're creatures who run on appreciation
Yes.
more than, more than maybe even economics, or financial security or any other thing. If you're getting the appreciation, you can even work for free, but that appreciation is a must. And
Mm-hmm.
at times, I think that leads to this trap where you're constantly putting out work, which is half done, not done, half cooked, uncooked. And because you'll just get some kind of a feedback from, 10, 20 comments, rather
Yes.
than, taking your time, presenting the work in a certain manner. Uh, because I also think it's a, again, I think that's where the curation part comes in, that you need to be very aware, of how you're presenting your work. So
Yes.
you can, take somebody's, let's say, a minute or two, they're just going to drop you a heart and like write, something like bahut ala, which half of NCA does, irrespective of whether that's Lahore or Pindi, and be gone on their way. Or you can, literally take the time to craft the project that you've put in, time and efforts and months of your life, and present it in a certain their life, looks at it in detail, and has a conversation with you. So a lot of times there are people who never say anything to my work publicly, but they will then write an email or send me a voice note or, maybe drop a DM. And there they're talking about, paragraphs about your work. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think there can be anything better feeling than somebody really going into your work that deep, trying to peel off the layers and layers and layers.
Mm-hmm. And so, what about it excites you the most? Don't you think it's how people they actually take out time from the routine and put in effort to understand what this visual creative, this
Yeah.
designer, this someone who has a vision is putting out to the world? There has to be a reason for this. So, what about it makes you so restless and so excited? Is it the response, or is it the validation maybe, or does it, what is it exactly?
I think personally, in my case, I am not somebody who's huge on validation.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe is something that I need to let go of, because it was coming from a time where certain people did not understand certain things, and I was facing a lot of, rejections, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of walls, because like, the work wasn't relevant enough, which is the exact opposite case, that now it's relevant, so everything is open.
Mm-hmm.
But I think validation से ज्यादा important वहां पे जो मेरे लिए चीज होती है वो ये होती है कि you had this very random manifestation of an idea that, okay, I can create something like this. You
Mm-hmm.
brought it into a physical space, and then that energy passed on to your viewers. So
Yes.
what's the impact that it's going to have in their lives? So a lot of times with, the projections that are moving towards, can they just sit and forget about their worries? Because, that's something that also comes from, like, I've worked in animation for a little while, that, when you're walking into a movie, and that is one reason why, as they say in Bollywood, that masala cinema sells. that nobody wants to see real life reflected back at them. Nobody wants to see their worries. So in the same vein, can the work transport them to somewhere else? And that again is connected to my sci-fi upbringing, I would say, where I was sitting in Pakistan and reading Asimov and reading iRobot and reading the Foundation series and reading these things and concepts about these weird worlds and distant planets, but also being from a certain kind of a middle class family from Lahore, having a very typical cliche upbringing. My Baba is a government servant. My Walda Motarma is a teacher, and I don't think there's a more cliche, upbringing than that could be. That's like the ultimate cliche. But then what you've been reading, what you've been exploring, I think teaches you a lot, shows you a lot. So, I mean, currently, when I'm having like talking to other people, I often say that you don't need to just read or travel to explore or to learn. You can, so there's something that I'm extremely interested in, which is music theory. I am pretty tone deaf. I cannot sing. I have tried to play an instrument, learned them and failed at it. But I love music theory. I absolutely love, how a certain composer sat down, what they did. I understand that a bit. Whether that's Eastern, whether that's Western, how things transform from East to West, and how different music schools and music, cultures came into being. What was the role of jazz in, in like the culture of colored people in America? And so on and so forth. What role did, obviously Qawwali is huge in Asia, but it is because it had a certain link to our religion. So again, there you need to understand that what role does your art or your design or whatever your creative practice is, it's fulfilling for the people. Is it giving them hope? Is it taking hope away from them? That can be a thing as well. That's totally your thing. You want to leave people in despair and you want to leave them uh, absolutely running for their lives by your works. Great, do that by all means. I'm not saying be the hero, be the protagonist. You don't need to be that, uh, but you need to leave them with something, because at the end of the day, people are running on some basic emotions and they need to connect to you on those hardcore emotions, whether that is happiness, whether that is anger, whether that is disgust. The one thing that I personally think is death for a creative individual is if they're shown indifference towards their work. That's the worst. I mean, hate is absolutely okay. Years out of hate. But indifference is something that I think is very scary, at least for me. So, that's personally very scary. So, yeah, validation, obviously, everybody wants it. There's no shame in saying that you don't want it. But it matters to a certain extent, because at times there are things that that you're doing right. And it doesn't matter if somebody validates you or not. You know in your heart that it's right and you're going to go out and do it. And doesn't matter आपको किसी ने कहा है कि वो सही है, या if there are 10,000 people standing against you, do it by all means. Or at least I do it, so I'm a little वो ढीठ हूँ मैं उस मामले में, for a lack of a better English term. So yeah.
So as a creative individual, you feel, I hope you also agree that you generate curiosity out of your work. You want to bring a change in the visual perception of the society. You want to train them, or you want to accommodate them, or give them something to think about. Maybe, slow down, like you said, to put away all the worries and look at the very slow paced work, like you mentioned in your earlier works or the recent works. It all is a part of a very positive criticism on the culture, on the society we live in, or the habits and patterns or the thinking methodologies. In your creative process, how do you integrate art with cultural criticism? And we're talking about positive or constructive criticism over here.
I don't think I indulge in criticism per se. I wouldn't want to sort of put myself in that entire space, because there are a lot of brilliant, much more senior artists than me, creatives than me, who जिनकी पूरी जिंदगी की ही practice जो है ना वो cultural criticism. So I'm not somebody who's doing cultural criticism. What I'm doing is I am just presenting a very hyper pop culture look at the reality, you know. So अब वो आपकी reality क्या है, वो आप पे है. अगर हमारे यहाँ violence है तो है, अगर हमारे यहाँ sectarianism है तो है. Do we live in our own bubbles? Yes, we do. And you know, is there a different world outside? No. And I mean, one thing that I am very, very open about is that I don't believe in the notion of the starving artist. That is a notion that I absolutely don't like, and that is a notion that I think should end. Because, see, if based on your work, a company or a project is making money, is selling products, or a curator is flying around halfway around the world based on your work, but you are having a hard time paying the rent, then you know there's something wrong with the system. There's something very wrong with the way things have been done. And, either you just shut up and take it, which is, one way to go about it, which a lot of people do go through it. But then the other way is that, you do your own thing and you say, okay, fine, ye aapke yahan hota hai, but I am not comfortable with this. But I do understand that when you're new, there is an issue that a lot of times you think that there is a ladder which you need to go through. But the reality is that ladder does not matter anymore. You're living in the age of the internet. Everything is open. You can research, you can, send things. You don't need to be worried about who at a certain level or a post is going to give you the stamp of approval. Nobody is. And even if they do, that can take you a certain while. I mean, same in the way, like how I was talking about the plagiarism part, that nobody can hold your finger and take you on your own creative journey. You need to do it yourself. So I think the only criticism I have there is a twofold thing. One, as creatives, be presentable, make sure that your work means something.
Yes.
The only issue that I feel is that at times people produce work that is so personal, and there is no harm in producing personal work, but it is so personal that it doesn't remain relatable to anybody else. Now, either, again, wait for the right time, wait for the right people, wait to find that sort of a mental headspace. Otherwise, maybe, make your work be a little different as well. एक चीज है, पता नहीं, मुझे याद नहीं आ रहा who said this, that the Manto's work became all the rage after Manto had passed away, because there was no problem with the work, but
With the
the
person creating that
gentleman's
work.
personality was the only barrier in his own work during his own lifetime. So at times I feel that कोई भी काम बहुत बहुत रेयर होता है कि किसी का काम बुरा हो, बहुत ही रेयर होता है. सारे लोग, at least in a space like Pakistan where you need to struggle to be a creative, at least the people that I know, they've left bigger jobs, bigger opportunities, bigger career paths to be in this space and be a creative. So they do put their heart and soul into their works, but they're so up in arms about the work and their own belief systems that at times it overshadows the work.
Yes.
At times it's super hard to communicate with a person on an individual level and discuss their work, because either they'll be on their own high train, or either they'll be stuck in this regressive cycle of no, I am nobody, no, I am nobody,
I don't know
which
anything.
is just scary, because you do know something, yeah. No matter where you're coming from, no matter what you're making, the way you might be handling a certain material, only you can know. So for instance, when it comes to, let's say, comics or pop culture, or the street culture of the 80s 90s, there are certain things that I know, there are certain things that I understand, and that's absolutely okay for me to sit and discuss it. But आजिज़ी कहीं जगह पे नहीं भी जरूरी होती. हर जगह जरूरी नहीं है कि आपने या बिल्कुल ही ऊपर रहना या बिल्कुल ही नीचे रहना. आप एक दरमियानी न्यूट्रल सी उस पे रख सकते हैं अपना अबूर भी रखा आपको है तो है. Because that's one thing I feel that it sort of stops our space from growing, general creative space, because we are too concerned about what people are thinking about our work, rather than being concerned about the fact that what do we feel or think about our work.
Yes. Yes.
personally. And that's a very personal thing, and it can, change from person to person. So that's just my opinion.
I sometimes feel that the most of the creative visuals, I've come across many people who actually, before starting or commencing a project or sketch an idea or to let out what their thought process is like, they would first worry about what would people think about it. So, and it is really important for the artist to have that deep emotional and physical connection with the work itself, like we used to, like how I personally would love it. Like all the icons and the masters that we see, they used to put themselves in a solitary state where they would connect with the art, they would connect, they would speak, they would create their own language, and they would not care about the responses they would receive later. But an unfortunate situation that has been created for the creative individuals is we are made to think about things which are 4 to 5 steps ahead of the creation that you are just about, you're just conceiving it right now. It's under the pregnancy stage, it hasn't been birthed right now, but and that sort of cripples the mindset. And I think everyone in the creative field has been there, has been through this, has gone through this, and is currently going through it as well. And I feel like a lot of people, they lack in that understanding. Which area of creative process do you lack the most? It's about
Uh,
you, it's about your work.
I think
What
you've gotten me in a corner here. Well, one thing of,
you?
like, so I mean, I'll just tell of a little incident that happened recently
Yes,
while
please.
we were, planning for this.
Mhm.
So, I mean, when you asked me to send you a photograph, so I was like, okay, she's just gonna put that photograph and, then take it forward. But then I realized that you were doing these very wonderful little tiny, almost like Franco-Belgian kind of sketches for, every other guest. And I was like, oh my God, she's going to draw me. Now, one, there was a certain excitement, but two, there was also the excitement that I know my good angles, I know what looks better. So I'm sitting there and thinking, यार maybe जो है ना वो ऐसी वाली तस्वीर भेजनी चाहिए थी, उसका sketch ज़्यादा बेहतर आता. फिर then I was
Mhm.
like, you know what? Here is a creative who is representing you, which is a great thing, which is a fun, exciting thing. Let her do what she does. Stop being the creative director all the time. Yes, you're that as your job, but you do not
Mhm.
need to be that in real life. So just like an experience of, that at times बहुत ज्यादा controlling होना भी सही नहीं होता ना अपने
Mhm.
लिए भी. And I think when you say uh, what's the one area that I lack in? One I used to lack in about, trying to dots, trying to formulate for a lack of a better word, an artist statement, or a
Mhm.
concerns. That I think I've covered. One thing that I've historically lacked is I'm not great at photography. I do not have great skills in photography, and that is one thing that I've been trying to counter right now, because I just
Mhm.
feel that it's about time that, I bring that into my practice somehow or the other. Because that's one thing that I've not explored. I'm not really a hard and fast believer of, mediums, because
Mhm.
in the digital space, there are so many new mediums coming every day, and you can change and create things. Uh, so yeah, one thing that I think I am lacking, at least previously I was lacking, was
Mhm.
a certain kind of, skill set to present my things. Although it wasn't a concern of, it wasn't a language concern. It wasn't a, a concern of having a certain kind of abur on Angrezi or not. It
Yes.
was just that there wasn't a clarity on my own work, and I had to sit and figure it out for a very long time कि अच्छा यार जो मैं कह रहा हूँ क्या किसी ने इस पे कोई किताब लिखी है क्या
Hmm.
are there filmmakers exploring similar kind of subjects, are there other musicians who are making music about memories that their parents sort of left them. And then luckily enough I got the reference from somebody in the comics domain, which was Mouse by Art Spiegelman,
Mhm.
because he's talking about his parents, experience of the Holocaust. But that's his parents' experience, so it's
Hmm.
not his, and it's not like there is a certain relationship between, memories and imagination. So I think मेरे लिए वहाँ पे है photography अभी, because I think I've been very far away from it. I was part of the DSLR generation. So उस टाइम पे हर बंदा इतनी कर रहा था कि I was like यार मैं नहीं करूँगा. But now I feel that that is something that I've lacked in general. So that is something that I want to do. And secondly, I think I've not, for a very long time, I wasn't really comfortable with the self-portrait
Mm.
for God knows how many reasons. But uh, since 6, 7 months, that is something that I've been doing very actively. I've been documenting myself because I just realized randomly that, okay, you know what? I've never documented myself. I just
Mm-hmm.
don't. And it's something that comes very naturally to people, that they often, when you're starting to draw and when you're starting to experiment, when you're starting to, do things, you often, you're your own first subject. But
Yes.
I was never that. I've never
Mm.
been my own subject. So that is a little, I think मैंने अपने आप को फंसा लिया थोड़ा सा वहां पे कि अच्छा अपने आप को करेंगे तो क्या होगा. So yeah, it does, comes with a certain bag of insecurities that I guess everybody has. Uh, but I think it's time to face those, whatever they might be.
Do you also believe in
So
going back to the basics? For instance, if you would want to understand about music, musicology, or compositions, would you go back to those rhymes or xylophone rhymes or the notes or the initial lessons? Are you that person who dives deeper into the basics and then goes to intermediate and then advanced level, or do you first look at the advanced version of something and then start your research from there? What is the sequence of your curiosity?
yeah, just like for this exact thing, I think the only place where I'm doing this is in storytelling,
Hmm.
in film or in books and comics, because you see, year after year, we're facing the exact same stories. So that is
Hmm.
something that I'm fascinated with. The hero with the thousand faces is it's still relevant today in
Hmm.
this post-internet, in this, post-pandemic world as it was, let's say 40 years ago.
Hmm.
So that is a certain thing which is, very inspiring to me, that okay, what were those very, basic things, ये कहाँ से आ रही थी? Because there's, for example, there's some songs जो cross cultural tunes चलती रही हैं, you
Hmm.
know, but what was their origin? Was it poem? Was it a lullaby? What was it? And so in a way, yes, but not in terms of maybe my own practice, but more as a
Hmm.
research point of view. If this visual is coming, how far back in time can I go to get this visual? So for instance, one thing that I haven't, it's like I mean, it's a pastime that I have, is like looking at old archival things. And there are like, comic books, they can be postcards, they can be illustrations. So now, there is so much to be learned there, so much to be learned there. So Paul Klee, for example, is a fantastic, illustrator, but his relevance now is not that much.
Yes.
Although जिन लोगों ने उससे काम सीखा या जो लोग उसके काम से inspired थे, so Disney was inspired by him,
Yes. His timing was
आपका
correct.
Yes.
His
So
timing was
Walter
correct.
Foster was
Hmm.
inspired by him. So in the
Hmm.
same manner, even till this day, so if you look at Mola Jat, if you look at, let's say, even Pathan in Bollywood, which recently came, they're both spaghetti easterns. They have the exact same beats of a cowboy film.
Yes.
There is the guy who is either an outsider or a loner. In case of Mola Jat, sorry for spoilers if anybody hasn't seen it. Or in the case of, Pathan, it's somebody who was like, who's been missing for a couple of years. And it's the classic cowboy trope, and they're coming in and the bad guy is a certain, kind of an opposite. And
Hmm.
but he's also very honorable as well. I mean, Nuri Nath's character in Mola Jat is very honorable. That's a
Yeah.
classic cowboy thing that I absolutely love. I mean, he loves his sister. He is
Hmm.
a family person. If you consider him with Mola, in this, Mola is a loner. He's a jerk.
Yes.
He's just roaming around being angry all the time. What is good there to like in Mola? But Nuri is honorable. But
Yeah.
yes, he's also a murdering psychopath. So and those are, classic tropes from, let's say, Yul Brynner's, the man with no name and a few dollars more and all those. And if you go further back, you will see that these things were being done by Akira Kurosawa in, Seven Samurai Army and all his work. And so, and he, had inspired this from, these Romanesque theater troops. So it's just crazy to see how things flow and how they change and how they mix. And I think to create anything new, you need to reference something old. You cannot do it without, referencing something.
Yes.
So one experience in my life that I had, which I think which felt great, was I was working on this animated project, and we were dealing with a character, but uh, I mean, visually, वो character निकाल लिया था. But when working with the animators, I couldn't really explain to them that इसकी body movement क्या है. So that character is quirky, he's smart, he's also cool, थोड़ा सा लफंगा भी है, थोड़ा सा मवाली भी है, but so, and then I was like, you know what? So I'm sitting and I'm spent like, weeks on this, and there's no break is coming. And then I'm sitting and I'm like, oh my God, I've been trying to reference Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Amir Khan from Rangila for almost 3 weeks, but I couldn't put those two characters together. And then I took all the footage from YouTube, I showed that to the animators, and boom, the work was done. Because the movement and the quirks were there, but I just couldn't fit it. And now, for anybody that gets inspired by that character, for them it might be 10 different things, but for me, I know where that's coming from. So in Pakistan, for example, Alif Noon was being derived from Lauren and Hardy, and we still have a Charlie Chaplin reference everywhere, but Charlie himself was being inspired by Buster Keaton.
Yes.
For the people in even our age, they do not know who Buster Keaton is. So I think that is something very important. And again, it goes back to being raised in a certain manner. So, for example, my thesis in my undergrad was a comic book series based on Imran series. So I don't know how many people know of Imran series, but it's literally one of the biggest pop culture things produced in Pakistan. And Ibn Safi, the writer of Imran series, has inspired Javed Akhtar and Salim Javed, who is Salman Khan's dad. And half the dialogues that Amitabh Bachchan owes his career to are dialogues that are Imran's. All those dialogues from Lavaris and Sharabi के अच्छा शराब पीते हो हाँ जी जब देखने जाता हूँ नाच वगैरह तो शराब भी पीता हूँ है नाच भी देखने जाते हो हाँ तो ताश खेलने के बाद नाच तो देखने जाना ही पड़ता है. Those are Imran's dialogues. Those aren't Amitabh Bachchan's dialogues.
Wow.
But the thing is, because we don't have work, over time they've been lost, and that's the sad thing. And I mean, so much like I don't remember where this is from, but there's like a scene where a character comes into a bar and orders a glass of milk, and that is essential Imran series. That is Ibn Safi's creation. Yes, he was borrowing from the likes of Agatha Christie and all that, but that's very Pakistani pop culture. And then people who adopted it, I mean, I don't think Ibn Safi and his family ever got credit for it. Yes, Amitabh Bachchan got a career out of it. Javed Akhtar became Javed Akhtar because of it.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, we need to own our our works and ourselves in that manner.
That's a wonderful message. If your creativity had a name, what would it be?
I think to define it would be chaos. And do you know what ASCII is? Like ASCII? It's like this old code that we used to create images with. जिस तरह पहले पुराने messages में करते थे.
वो हाँ बंदा. Yes,
how
yes,
you
yes.
would like make emojis from text.
Yes,
I
yes.
think chaotic ASCII would be that, because that essentially my work is based on code, but then the chaos that I'm creating or the amount of chaos that I create, I don't think the code is yet able to handle it. So yeah, maybe in the future, maybe in the near future.
I'm very curious about one thing, and I always ask this to people who I'm very, very curious about, because the places that you live in, they also have a very high influence on your work. You spend your childhood, you spend your adolescent time, teenage ho gaya, adulthood ho gaya. Uska aapki na, like you said, post memory information that is being stored into you. They say artists and authors and creatives often become embodiments of the cities they had lived in or intimately associated with a particular space or a place. Where do you feel like you belonged the most?
You know this on a personal level as well. I have a very love-hate relationship with Lahore. I love this city. I can't stand this city. It's like, it's like that one relationship that never really worked out, but no, I don't know. It's like a very complicated relationship that I have with Lahore.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I mean, I don't think I have a home anywhere. I don't.
Mm.
I'll be super honest here. I'll be super candid. I don't belong anywhere, but because of that, I belong everywhere. So I've had the chance to travel, and oddly enough, normal people when they start, their masters or when they get to travel, they
Mm-hmm.
usually get to travel to, Europe first or US first or Australia first. Me being me, my travel history is in the most randomest of places, in the worst of times. So Uzbekistan, when there is some kind of a military intervention going on, Russia, like literally part of one of the first Pakistani cohorts who went to Russia. Now Russia and us are pretty chill about a lot of things. But
Mm.
back then we were like some of the first people in like 20, 30 years who were getting visas. And this is a little before the Russian Football World Cup, the
Mm.
last one. And being a Pakistani in those places, but then it also gives you a certain strength that you're home in the world. So, I mean, meeting people who are, so one thing that I have heard was that, a lot of friends, Serbians से ना मिलना, वो बड़े अजीब से लोग होते हैं, ठीक है?
Mm.
But then I figured out, yeah, I was the most fun with Serbians, so what's wrong with, I mean, I don't know, ठीक है? So मेरे अंदर वो थोड़ा सा कम है कि I don't feel, being threatened all the time. I
Mm-hmm.
when I do think it's a larger cultural issue that we have. Even if for somebody who's living in the West, they're so defensive of who they are. They are so defensive of their culture की हम बात करते रहते हैं कि they don't even want to accept the other person as who they
Yes.
are. You know,
Yes. True.
आप अचानक से जाके एक शख्स को नहीं बता सकते भाई, आप उसका पूरा लाइफस्टाइल डिस्ट्रॉय नहीं कर सकते. And
Mm.
specifically, I'm sorry to say this, with my own countrymen and my brothers and sisters, this is something so ingrained in us कि हमें हर जगह जाके ना, अगर मैं लाहौरी हूँ तो मुझे हर जगह को लाहौरी बनाना है. और हम बनाते भी हैं. हमने यूके में भी ढेर सारे, लाहौर में भी ढेर सारे कराची लाहौर पिंडी बना रही हैं. And that is not the way to go. That's why we are facing the kind of things that we face.
Yes.
So half the time somebody would say, those people are very racist, and then you discover no, those people weren't really racist. You were being so stuck up in a certain situation that they became stuck up as well. I'm really sorry to say that. आप
Mm.
एक्सेप्ट करोगे किसी को तो अगला आपको करेगा ना. हमारे
Yes.
यहाँ अगर आप बिल्कुल ही पकड़ के बैठ, और लाइक हमारे यहाँ तो देखो ना, आप शहर के डिफरेंसेस आ जाते हैं. ओ दैट पर्सन इज फ्रॉम कराची, दिस पर्सन इज
Hmm.
फ्रॉम लाहौर, एंड दैट पर्सन इज फ्रॉम द कैपिटल और पिंडी.
क्लासिफिकेशन है एक बहुत ज्यादा
Like,
टॉक्सिक
why is
किस्म
it
की.
there?
यस.
And why is it there? I mean, yes, I was born and raised in Lahore, but I own Karachi as much as I own Islamabad, and I am free to roam anywhere I want. And maybe that also comes from a fact that I'm a minority, so I was born with a target on my back, which is also so funny because it takes away certain fears that a lot of people have. But being
Mm-hmm.
honest, I mean, that if you're born where you don't have an surety of your own life in your own country at a certain given moment, then also the fear goes away. कि जब
Yes.
आनी है तो आनी है, वो फिर यहाँ आएगी या सर्बिया में आएगी या पेशावर में आएगी या मोरक्को में आएगी, वो आ जाएगी. ठीक है. But that means that you can at least be comfortable in the general world, because I find this very difficult that people, specifically in today's time, they need to find uh like this, they need to find something to debate with you on.
Yes.
Okay, we can have 99.9 things in common, but we will be debating on that one thing. And this is something that goes deep, at least in how I changed my life. There was a time when I used to be very jealous of every creative. Anybody would put up anything, anybody would share a project, and I mean, I don't want to take that word, but I would be destroyed inside and outside. I would be like, ये क्यों काम कर रहा है, इसका काम ऐसा क्यों है, इसको सारे पूछ क्यों रहे हैं? But then one day I just sat myself down, having exhausted myself in my jealousy, that कि भाई तेरा मसला क्या है? Why are you jealous of everybody? You cannot be a painter, filmmaker, a fashion designer, eyewear designer, music video producer all in one day.
Yes.
And you are getting jealous of 20,000 people doing 20,000 things, you know? So just sit. And what flipped was I started studying those people, you know? Okay, here is a director. Why is he getting all the acclaim? Why is he doing something? And I think it's hamare yahan, as a nation, there is one thing that does irk me, is that anytime somebody does something good, the first thing we say to them is something negative.
Yes.
You can get one of the biggest scholarships in the world for an artist, and a gut reaction from the general space would be, हाँ खातून है, बस पाकिस्तान से है, इसने women card खेला होगा. भाई, what? Like, is that the best you could say? Is that your comeback to somebody achieving something? So at least for us, we are not proud and happy of, you know, people achieving something. Now I'm the opposite. So anybody that, you know, I know or I'm friends with or I'm an acquaintance with, they do something, I get 20 times more hyper.
That's amazing.
Maybe वो खुद भी शायद इतने hyper ना हो, खुश ना हो उस चीज पे. I am like, you know, मैं उनका वो जो इतना अलंबरदार बन जाता हूँ कि यार उसका काम देखा, कितना अच्छा काम कर रहा है, she is doing this, they are doing this. And I think that comes from the fact that you need to let go of your own insecurities at a certain time. And this comes from this mindset that in the art space, in the creative space, there is not enough to go around. Everybody has more than enough to go around. There are enough opportunities. There are enough things that you can do. The gatekeepers are going to tell you कि भाई 2 roles हैं और 200 लोग हैं तो हम आपको दे रहे हैं. But the truth is, they're keeping 20,000 opportunities away from you. And you know what the fun part is? In the age of the internet, the gatekeepers don't matter. I'm really sorry to say this.
Yes.
They don't. You know, no. So you can make your own path. I mean, in your case, did you ask the permission of anybody to start, you know, an online journal?
Not
No,
at
it's your
all.
thing. You just sat, you
Not
decided
at
on a
all.
time, and you started it. So yeah, I mean, so हमारे साथ वो थोड़ा सा मसला है कि हम we need to let go of the negativity and the
Yes.
division.
Be nicer.
छोड़ना पड़ेगी थोड़ी. Definitely.
Yes.
Be kinder. Yes, specifically after the pandemic, we've seen that we're all starting from zero.
Yes.
किसी के पास कुछ खास रहा नहीं है after the pandemic, and given the not really gonna harm you to be a little nicer to people. But I think वो थोड़ा सा वही है ना कि हमारे अंदर वो it's a colonial leftover कि हमने साहब बनना है, तो
बिल्कुल.
फिर एक साहब बननेगा तो बाकी सारे सर्वर्स ही होंगे ना.
Yes. Then on
Multiple
that
साहब.
note, a quick question because we have a minute left. If I ask you to
Yes.
give 3 positive affirmations to yourself, what would they be?
Look at how far you've come.
Mhm.
You know, do like at time to time, do check how many steps you've taken on this, you know, journey overall.
Yes.
And apart from that,
Quick,
the
we have
other
a few
would-
seconds left.
the other would be, I mean, keep on experimenting. There's
Yes.
nothing in the world without experimenting.
Mhm.
And the last is always be true to yourself, no matter what. No matter what it takes, no matter what you have to lose, be true to yourself. And I think it sounds a little cliche and it sounds a
It
little
means a
Hollywood,
lot.
but that's it.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
so meaningful. And thank you so much. Thank you for your time. I hope it has given you joy that as much as it has given me. And I hope that it has given you some perspective and thought-provoking ideas that you
Oh, definitely.
usually wouldn't think
Definitely.
about. Thank you
Definitely.
so
Definitely.
much. And thank you everyone
Thank you
who's
for
been
having me.
thank you everyone who's been listening to us. Until
Thank
next
you,
time.
everybody who tuned in. Thank you so much. Means much. Thank you.
Okay.